Hi, I'm Rupesh Nair, Product Manager in Azure DevOps. Today I'm going to talk about Enterprise CD to Azure. Here is the agenda for today's session. First, we're going to cover what's new in Azure pipelines. We'll talk about Enterprise Code to Cloud challenges and how Azure Pipeline can help, followed by a quick demo of some of the new features rolled out in Azure pipelines. I'm super excited to announce the general availability of Azure Pipeline's YAML CD features. We now offer a unified YAML experience to configure each of your pipelines to do CI, CD, or CI and CD together. With Azure Pipelines, you can build, test, and deploy faster to any platform and any cloud. YAML CD feature introduces several new features that are available for all organizations. I'm going to cover a few of them today. Not only you can model your CI/CD multi-stage pipelines, you can model application environments to get end-to-end traceability. You can consistently apply security, compliance with approvals and checks, decorators, artifact policies, required templates, and so on. Or how you can shift left the code quality and improve the productivity with review apps. You can practice safe deployments with out-of-the-box deployment strategy like Canary or Blue-Green to reduce the downtime and risks in your production deployments. Let's take a look at enterprise code to cloud challenges and how Azure Pipelines can help you to solve the same.
We at Microsoft have been working with many enterprises. What we have seen is managing delivery of large complex applications can pose unique set of challenges. They often lead to long development, test and deploy cycles, with bulk of them being manual. And high percentage of manual steps will likely slow down your delivery pipelines and increase the chances of errors, thus preventing you from being able to scale your code to cloud initiatives. In order to meet your throughput and consistency goals, the tooling should support automating a bulk of the manual steps in your delivery process, including provisioning of resources and the delivery process itself. Moreover, it has to be repeatable and consistent. Azure Pipelines, along with the Azure's infrastructure as code, gives you significant advantage in this area. For instance, you can provision resources in Azure using infrastructure as code and automate deployments using YAML pipelines. The pipeline file and the infrastructure definition is versioned along with your code. Second, enterprises need to reduce the risk associated with the changes. Developers need an ability to review the changes before the code gets merged with the main line. Ops need an ability to have the change management process with their CI/CD pipelines. They need to prevent unauthorized deployments to production, need to ensure resources stay compliant with the corporate standards. Moreover, teams need to follow approved process to deliver application updates, and so on. You also need an ability to audit the changes. With Azure pipelines, you can consistently apply security, compliance with approvals and checks, decorators, artifact policy checks, required template checks, and so on. Getting end-to-end traceability is another key challenge. As a product owner, you should be able to view what is the release that is currently deployed to the production, along with capturing rich data at every step right from planning to deployment. With Azure pipelines, not only you can track associated changes and the work, but you can track it all the way down to the resource in the cloud, in this case on Azure. Ability to debug and diagnose issues as it occurs is another key requirement. Developers should be spending less time separating the signals from the noise and accelerate root cause analysis. First-class integration provided with Azure's monitoring solutions and built-in intuitive dashboards, access to production logs with end-to-end traceability will help you to get the insights straight away. With Azure pipelines, you can also automate and integrate into your existing service desk platforms such as ServiceNow. Last but not the least, ability to safely roll out changes to production is another challenge faced by many enterprises. Just because you are moving fast doesn't mean that you have to lose control. You can apply different safe deployment practices to minimize downtime and risk. For instance, you can roll out using Canary or rolling or blue-green strategies. We'll see more about that in the demo later.
Next, we are going to demo on how to get started with Azure Pipelines. In this demo, we're going to see how easy it is for you to get started with Azure Pipelines and how you can manage your pipeline configuration as code in your source control repository with the rest of your application code to ensure a repeatable and consistent application delivery process. Let's take a look at it. I'm in my GitHub repository. This is a sample app written in Go language. I'll try to configure a CI/CD pipeline for this repository using Azure DevOps pipelines. So I'm shifting to Azure DevOps. Here is my account, and I'm under Pipelines Hub, and I'm looking at the pipelines that I already have in my account. Let me go ahead and configure a new pipeline for this repository. I'm going to pick GitHub as my repository, which has the source code. Select the repository. It has analyzed the repository and it has recommended a set of templates that are optimum for the CI/CD configuration. For this demo, let me pick up deploy to Azure Kubernetes template. It has loaded all the subscription that I have access to. So let me pick the subscription that I'm interested in. And within this subscription, now I can target the Azure Kubernetes service where I want this application to be deployed to. Let me go ahead and configure this pipeline. So it has given me the entire YAML file, which has both the build and the deploy steps in it. So the pipeline template, as you can see, has a Kubernetes deploy step, which basically relies on the manifest files to configure my container app. So it's very easy for me to customize this template. So I can use the assistant here, and I can search and add any custom steps that I might require. And we have out of the box a ton of Azure tasks that you can target various Azure services. You can run your custom CLI scripts or deploy to app service, or even provision your own application resources using the Azure infrastructure as code templates. Or you can deploy to Azure MySQL, Azure Functions, IoT Edge, Key Vault, and the list is endless. What you need to do now is to save and run this pipeline. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to skip that part. I'm going to jump over to the pipeline that I've already configured. And the pipeline has build and the deploy stage, as you saw in the YAML. And if you click on for each of those steps, now you can actually see the deployment logs. And finally, your application is going to be deployed to the service that you've configured. And you have the external IP where you can actually browse this app. Getting back to the presentation, let's recap. What we've seen is like how easy it is for you to get started with Azure pipelines. And it has first-class integration to Azure. You can connect to Azure with one click, and you can target any of the resources that are available in Azure with a simple click. And to recap, all you need to do is connect to your GitHub repository, start with the pre-built template, configure the parameters, save and run. That's all it takes. Let's move to slightly advanced capabilities. In this demo, we are going to learn about two concepts: environments, and how environments is going to help you with end-to-end traceability, and review apps for improved collaboration. What's an environment? Environment is a collection of resources that can be targeted by deployments from a pipeline. Environments can include Kubernetes cluster, Azure web apps, virtual machines, databases, and any resource where your code gets deployed. Typical examples of environment names are like dev, test, QA, staging, and production. And review apps works by deploying every pull request from your Git repository to a dynamically created resource in an environment. That way, the team can see the changes in the PR as well as how they work with other dependent services before they are merged into the mainline branch. Let's start with the new pipeline again. This time again, I'm going to select the repository. And as part of the templates that are being recommended, instead of picking the deploy to Azure Kubernetes service template, I'm going to pick the deploy Kubernetes service with review apps and Azure Dev Spaces. So let me go and configure this template. Select the subscription. Once again, the template looks familiar as in the previous demo. I've configured the inputs for cluster, and the namespace and registry. And all I need to do is, in this case, I have this option of enable review app flow for pull request. I just need to check that and configure my pipeline. So we have the pipeline completely configured. And just to recap the scenario, the developer is going to make the code change and is going to deploy. And every time a pull request is raised, we want that change to be deployed to a dynamically provisioned resource. And the link should be available for the reviewer so that they can validate the change and sign off on the pull request before the code gets merged to the master. So the workflow is configured to do just that. Within the build stage, it's building the Docker file and pushing to the container registry. And within the deploy stage, we have two jobs. One that gets triggered whenever the request is coming from the pull request branch, and the other one which is happening from any other branch, like for example, master. In case of pull request, it has this review app step. Basically what it does is, it is going to create a new namespace and it will deploy the resource to that new namespace using the kubectl deploy step. And once it is deployed, it will also make sure that the link is available and updated in the pull request so that the reviewers can go and check the changes. And in case once the pull request gets merged, the deploy stage or this job gets triggered, which does the normal deployment as usual. Within the deploy stage, you can see there's an environment keyword, and it has actually provisioned a new environment resource for you, and it is targeting the cluster. And all you need to do now is like save and run this pipeline. I have already a pipeline that is configured, so let me jump back to that and walk you through the changes there. The pipeline that I've configured a few minutes before the demo. Let me pick the latest run. And once again, there are two stages in it, build and deploy stage. And the deploy stage, as you remember, had two jobs, the pull request deploy job or a regular deployment step. And I was also referring to the fact that it provisioned the environments for you as well within the YAML configuration. So if you click on the environment, you can see the environment that has been set up in the pipeline for you. And you can actually view the environment resource. In this case, I have this namespace where originally that I have picked and configured the pipeline. And through the workflow, it has configured a new namespace for me. And my changes are actually deployed to this namespace. And I can go back to my repository and I can look at the change and review the app changes. And finally, I can actually sign off on the pull request. And let me take you to the pull request to show the checks that have been applied by the review app scenario here. As you can see here, the review app has been deployed and is available at this URL. And the reviewers can now check the changes that are intended, and then finally they can sign off on their pull request. In this case, I've already closed the pull request here. To sum up, with review apps, you are able to deploy the changes to a resource which was dynamically spun up and review the changes before you sign off on the pull request, thereby improving the collaboration between the team members and improving the productivity. Let's talk about environment. The advantage of using environments include the following. You get the complete deployment history along with the pipeline name, and the run details are recorded for each of the environments and the resources that have been targeted. Traceability also allows you to track whether the code change or the commit has reached an environment. Another advantage of environment is ability to kind of secure the environment from unauthorized use. So you can either restrict the access to individual users or to a specific pipeline. Let's get back to the presentation. To recap, you're able to configure the pipeline to set up a review app scenario that improves the productivity. And you also saw that the pipeline automatically provisioned environment, which gave you an end-to-end traceability view, the state of the deployment, as well as the associated commits and work items that were linked to the deployment. Next, we are going to cover approvals and checks on resources. Pipelines rely on resources such as environments, service connections, agent pools, and library items like variable groups or secure files. Checks enable the resource owner to control whether a stage in a pipeline can consume the resource. As an owner, you can define the checks that must be met prior a stage consuming that resource can start. For example, a manual approval checks on the environment ensures that the deployment can only happen after the reviewers have signed off. Likewise, we have many other types of checks. Let's take a quick look at the demo. In the same portal review dev environment that was configured in the previous demo. And let's configure additional checks on this environment so that any deployment that goes through will have to meet the checks that I've configured. So click on approvals and checks here. And you can see the list of checks that are enabled on the resources. Let's see the complete list. You can either enable a manual approval. For example, as part of these automated checks, you can either invoke an Azure function that does some validations for you in order to decide whether the deployment can go ahead or not. Or you could check the health of the resources using Azure Monitor service. You can even enforce the templates that are being used for the deployment is the standard one that is approved for the organization. If not, the deployment cannot succeed. So let's go ahead and configure a manual check for this demo. Add the user, and you can add the instructions. Let me go ahead and add this check. And I'll go back to the pipeline and trigger a new run. We'll see that the deployment will pause at the deploy stage when it is going to target that environment. Let me fast forward this a bit. Deployment is now waiting for an approval before it can proceed. Let me go ahead and approve. And now the deployment has been queued, and you can see that one of the checks that has been configured has passed. With this, let's head back to the presentation.
What we have seen is with approvals and checks, you can prevent unauthorized deployment to production.
Let's move on to the next demo. In this demo, we are going to see how you can configure your pipeline to perform safe deployments. When you're deploying application updates, it's important that the technique that you use to deliver the update will allow you to deploy safely with minimum downtime and also reducing the risks. In this demo, we're going to look at how we can do a Canary deployment to a Kubernetes service. And I'm going to navigate to the pipelines review Canary pipeline that I've already configured. So let me go and edit this. Let me get this out of the way. In this workflow, as you can see, there are once again two stages. There is the build stage and then there is the production stage. Normally you don't deploy to production directly. Of course, for this demo, we can do that. In this production stage, as you can see, I'm using a Canary deployment strategy within a deployment job. And it is actually targeting this environment, and within that it is targeting the resource called Canary, which is a Kubernetes namespace. And as with any deployment strategy, you need an ability to kind of initialize your deployment setups, then deploy the update and route the traffic to it. So let me take you through this step by step. So let me collapse all of this so that you can get a better view. So at a high level, you can see the structure of the Canary deployment strategy that is available within the YAML pipeline for you. And you can define the increment, like the number of pods that has to be initially updated. As part of the deployment strategy, you have an option to specify your pre-deployment steps. In this case, I don't have anything other than like a script that echoing I'm going to initialize the deployment. You could have steps, for example, which could install a certificate or do some additional ingress or configuration that is required for you. Within the deploy step, I'm using the Kubernetes deploy task, and it also has this additional configuration which takes the strategy input automatically from the variable, which is basically the Canary deployment strategy, and also the percentage pods that needs to be deployed, and the namespace that is targeting, and the manifest files as an input. And once the deployment is done, you have an option of routing the traffic. In this case, I don't need, because Kubernetes is automatically managing that for me. And once the traffic is routed, I can perform additional checks. In this case, for example, I have kept some delay. I have configured it to 0 for the demo purpose, but you can allow the application to bake for some time. And you can now query your monitoring service. In this case, I'm using Azure Monitor for alerts that might have happened and impacted the health of the pods that are already deployed. So for the duration, you can actually check the pods, and if the health is good, you can continue the deployment. And the way it works is during the deployment, since I've specified 25% of the pods to be deployed in Canary mode, it is going to spin up additional pods. In this case, the environment has 4 pods already. So let me show you the environment as well. It has 4 replicas, and each one of them having 1 pod. And when the deployment proceeds, it's going to spin up 2 additional pods, one baseline and one Canary. Now you're actually watching the health against these 2 pods. And if everything is good, you continue with your deployment. Basically, it will go to ramp up to all the way to the 100%. If the deployments are not healthy, it is going to perform rollback by specifying the action as reject, in which case all the Canary pods that have been deployed will be retired, and you are back to the original set of pods that you already had in the cluster.
Let me go ahead and trigger.
Let's fast forward a bit. Now the Canary deployment strategy is going to start. So if I go back to the environment, you'll see that I had just 1 replica set with 4 pods, but the number is going to change. It's actually spinning up a new baseline in the Canary pods during the deployment. So if I go back and refresh the environment here, I'll see that additional replica set for the Canary and the baseline would have been created. So I have 1 baseline and 1 Canary. Now we're going to compare the health between these 2, and if everything is going to good, we're going to create the fresh deployments to the 100% of it. So now it is going to replace the 4 pods with the 4 new pods with the latest image from the deployment. Let's get back to the presentation. What we have seen that is you can customize the workflow to orchestrate safe deployment so that you can minimize risk and downtime. Combined with Azure monitoring integration or any other monitoring solutions, you can configure the pipeline to automatically roll forward or roll back. To summarize, Azure Pipeline YAML CD features are now generally available. With this, you can configure the pipeline to do CI or CD or CI and CD in a unified YAML experience. You can build, test, deploy faster to any platform or any cloud. And we have seen demos around like how you can get started easily, how you can apply security and compliance using approvals and checks, or even other checks like required templates or evaluate artifact policy checks and so on. We have seen how you can use review apps for effective collaboration and improve productivity, and also like how you can use safe deployment practices like Canary or blue-green strategy from within the YAML pipeline. To summarize, Azure Pipelines has a built-in integration with Azure. It allows you to connect your subscription with a single click, and you can target any resource within Azure using pipelines. We, as Microsoft, recommend Azure Pipelines as the CI/CD solutions to deploy to Azure. Here are some resources for you to get started. Thank you.